Hello and welcome to another edition of the book review here at CCXP Exam Simulator. I'm Michael Bartlett and today I'm going to be reviewing the book Designing for Emotion by Aarron Walter. I actually picked this book up a few months ago. It was the 2011 edition and I went through, marked it up, was getting ready to do a review, and then found out that the author had a second edition coming out, which is actually released today. So I got hold of that early this morning and I read through it, correlated all my notes, and so this is going to be the review of the second edition. So I had the following top 10 takeaways from this book. So firstly, a concept that Aarron introduces is that of ownable moments. This is a new term that I've not seen before. Let me read you some information here from the book about ownable moments. So in the text, Aarron refers to ownable moments to refer to points in the user experience where a business can identify a change or escalation in emotion, either good or bad. Now, Airbnb are referenced in the book as doing some journey mapping to look at areas where trust was most likely to be broken. So in that sense, they were looking for ownable moments. He also gives another example in the book where people are using TurboTax. And what TurboTax had done is they had seen that there was a question that could be asked referring to the death of a relative. And they knew that when that question was asked, if the response was yes, it was immediately probably going to have an impact on the person's emotion. And so they just put a very simple UI design in there so that when someone confirmed that they did lose a loved one, I think it was either a spouse or a dependent, obviously when you're filling the taxes out, when they selected yes to that, it immediately came up with just a little message to say, we're very sorry for your loss. And just a very small gesture, very small human gesture like that can make so much of a difference to a person's emotional state as well, just that recognizing what they're going through. And it costs nothing to put a little feature like that into a big software program. So that was another really great example of ownable moments, and it's definitely something that as an experienced designer you should be thinking about when you're designing out your experiences, either from scratch or when you're taking existing experiences and you're trying to find ways to enhance them. Is look for those areas where, if you will, emotion shifts gear. Because they can be very, very important sources of where you might be able to make a lasting impression on someone or just do something that's good for somebody. The next point that came up was, when possible, we should position peak experiences towards the end of the user journey. Now, I'll tell you, I've known about HCI for a long time, and I remember when I first came across some of the basic psychological principles, the two that struck me the most were the primacy effect and the recency effect. So the primacy effect being the first thing that you experience, i.e. first impressions, we all know they count, and then also the final experience or the final element of the list or something along those lines, the parting gesture, if you will. People remember that the most as well. And so I was very curious when I heard this idea of the peak end rule come up, which started being floated around about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. It came from the author of Thinking Fast and Slow. And I've got to be honest, I was never 100% sold on it. I saw some information about, and you guys are probably all familiar if you know the rule, with the famous colonoscopy study. Anyway, I want to flip over to Wikipedia really quickly just to show you a few things about the Pecan Rule. Okay, so on this page, I've scrolled to the bottom, particularly want you to take a look at the criticism section. So it says here, critiques of the Pecan Rule typically derive from its conflation of a complex mental value into a simplistic framework. Personally, I don't actually have a problem with that. If I can get like a 80%, 90% hit with a simplistic framework, I'd much rather use that every time anyway, because it just makes decision making and design faster. But anyway, it says here, a 2008 study found some support for the Pecan Rule, but also found that it was not an outstandingly good predictor of remembered experiential value, and that the happiness of the most memorable part of an experience predicted remembered happiness better than did the happiness at the peak or the end. So additionally, the extreme effects of peaks fade more rapidly over time, causing peaks to be recalled less positively and troughs to be recalled less negatively. And there's a few other things in there, but essentially what I'm getting at here is that I was never really 100% sold on it, and I was trying to find a way that I could find a way to bring this into experience design where I knew it was going to be a little bit more reliable. And actually, I think Aarron Walter's come up with the best rule of thumb here when he says position peak experiences towards the end. And here's the reason why. The end is more likely to stick in somebody's mind, but if the peak is closer to it, just by virtue of being close, it's also more likely to be remembered as well. Whereas if you have a peak experience that was right at the beginning, in the middle somewhere, then I can see that deterioration happening over time as the peak fades away. So I thought this was a really excellent recommendation from an experience design point of view. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to share that. There are some really good points made about storytelling in this book. Everybody, of course, understands that there's an inherent power of storytelling when it comes to affecting people's emotions and, of course, people's action as well. And what I really liked is, even though I've read a book on the science, in fact, the neuroscience of screenwriting and storytelling, this was a new point, which is the rising action or the rising conflict in a story produces cortisol. And what that does is that focuses your attention like a spotlight on concerning matters. So if you think about any movie where things are starting to go wrong and there's a lot of conflict, and anytime you get conflict, you get tension, and that tension needs to be resolved. People are watching that and they're trying to think, what would I do in that situation? Because, of course, as human beings, we're always trying to just make the best predictions on how to get out of a bad situation. So that is why there is so much focus from attention when it comes to rising action in a story. And then the other point that he makes is, simultaneously, our brains release oxytocin, the neurochemical responsible for care, connection, empathy, and narrative transportation. Of course, this is if you actually have a character that you are sympathetic with and worrying about. A lot of modern day filmmakers seem to not quite get that, and they keep making main characters that no one cares about whatsoever. But in classical filmmaking, the whole idea is that you have a hero, the hero goes on a journey, and the hero is somebody that you can relate to in one way or another. Therefore, you kind of put yourself in their shoes. He made an interesting point in the book about transparency. The example that was used was a company that had a web page for recruiting, and they decided to publish in a graphical format the results of their previous employee surveys. And so what that essentially did is it showed areas where there's still room for improvement and areas where they're doing really well. And I think that this works well with something called the pratfall effect, which essentially is where somebody that's perceived to be really good at something makes an embarrassing blunder or shows a human side, if you will, a mortal side. And what I think works really well is the company's basically saying, look, we think we're really great, we can do all these wonderful things, but we do actually have some areas where we have this room for improvement. And I think when you combine those two things, it turbocharges the ability to build trust. The pratfall effect wasn't specifically mentioned in this book, but from the example, I can see that correlation right there. So that's why I wanted to make sure from an experience design point of view that this was a key takeaway. He says people use instinct and emotion to choose something that's good enough when the best option is unclear. And a lot of this comes from some of the work that was done by Antonio Damasio. He's got a book that you may have heard of called Descartes' Error. And essentially, he talks in the book about an individual that had damage to the emotional part of their brain, and they were just unable to make basic decisions like what shirt to wear, what day of the week to go do something. I mean, they were just completely debilitated and would take, hours trying to come up with a decision. And so taking that study, what Aarron's saying in his book is that, normally we can try and apply logic to decisions, and there's still a debate as to, the balance between logic and emotion. But essentially, if you get two things and it's really hard to tell the difference between the two of them, or maybe they're different but you still can't really see which one's going to have the greatest value, that's where emotion comes in. And emotion basically is like a little shortcut as a tiebreaker, and it's much more powerful than that, but this point is very well made nevertheless. So it's something to be aware of in terms of design. Is you want to make sure that you build really good trust, and also that you want to be using all of the right the right design ideas, and we'll come to that in a minute in the review, that help people make those decisions easier and feel more comfortable with what they're choosing. So essentially what he's saying is it's you versus your audience gut. So how are you going to tackle that? So here's one way. I'm going to read you a quick passage from the book about Hicks Law. So in the book, he says, page simplicity also helps potential customers to perform a basic cost-benefit analysis. Hicks Law is a design principle that conveys this concept. It states that the time it takes to make a decision increases with the number of alternatives. Your audience performs an internal cost-benefit analysis every time you ask them to complete a task. And you don't have to explicitly ask them. It could just be there's a screen and they've got to figure out what to click on, or they've got to fill something out. All of that takes cognitive energy, and any kind of decision you make is going to be subject to Hicks Law. So I thought that was an excellent point. He says photo cropping shapes the audience's emotional perspective. The facism ratio design principle states that the photographs cropped tight to the subject's face encourage an emotional response from the viewer while emphasizing the personality of the subject. So this is just something very, basic, but if you're doing any kind of imaging work and the goal is to create an emotional connection, then you really want to be having tightly cropped faces. And another point I will bring from the film business as well is that when someone's looking straight on or towards you in a picture, that's going to create more of an emotional connecting than if they're looking a little off into the distance or even completely sideways. So that's something to bear in memory as well. And then the final point is personality in design helps you stand out. It helps you find your tribe. It helps you convey and invite passion, and it helps create long-term memories. Our brains are kind of, and he talks about this in the book, are like contrast machines. We're always looking for contrast. That's almost the first step in trying to make any kind of decision, which is why you'll see even people like Michael Porter in the past have talked about business strategy. And they say sometimes, if you really think about it, the only true business strategy is differentiation. You've got to be different. If you're identical to somebody else, then, people are literally just going to go to price at that point. So, and of course, if you're the same on price, then heck, you might as well be flipping a coin. So everything comes down to contrast. That's the kind of like the beginning step of making a decision. And so what they're basically saying is, if you inject some personality into your product, into your marketing, then it will help you stand out, will increase that contrast. But the other thing it does is, by having a strong personality, you almost take a position. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people want to be all things to all people. It's better to be loved by a few people than just liked by everybody. And so you really want to be able to use that personality to find the tribe. And once you've found your tribe, you'll have people that are passionate about what you do. And then that also invites them. So it invites them to be involved. I'm a member of a particular, there's this board game I really like, and it's got a Facebook group. And everybody in that group is constantly sharing, they played it, they painted the figurines, they bought these accessories, and then other people are asking them questions about where did you get this and how did you do that? And the passion is there, and it's invited by the fact that they have the Facebook page. So it's just allowing something to just exponentially grow. Whereas if it was just bland and trying to please everybody and didn't want to be bold in any way, shape or form, it probably wouldn't have that following. So that's why he stresses about the idea of personality, and of course that creates long-term memories as well. You only have to look at the Twitter account of Wendy's with the sassy way it replies to different people to see that that's gonna it's gonna stay in people's memory because it's different, and people kind of like appreciate that boldness. Now there is one final thing I'd like to bring up about this book before signing off this review, and this is really the kind of, if you were to sum up the mission statement of the book, in one paragraph, what would it be? And essentially, this is what I got. I took a few different things from the book and put them together, but essentially, if you boil this down, what the author is saying is this: people will forgive shortcomings, they'll follow your lead, and they will sing your praises if you recognize and respond to their emotional state. Emotional design is your insurance to maintain audience trust when things aren't going your way. And things can't always be perfect. Things will go wrong, and that's why it's very important to take this kind of approach to any kind of design, not just product design, marketing design, brand design, you name it, because essentially things will go wrong, and it buys you a little bit of insurance, it buys you a little bit of buffer so that you can make things right and you don't lose a customer. So that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this review. We'll have a few more coming shortly in the next few weeks. As I mentioned, I'm going to be doing some ones on storytelling next, so that should be pretty interesting. I've got these 2 new books that have different takes on that approach, so I'm going to contrast them against each other, have a smackdown, if you will, between them, and kind of review them together and see which one comes out on top, and if there's good insights from both of them. So I hope that was useful. My email address is support@ccxpexamsimulator.com if you need to get in touch with me. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time for another review. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.